I'm going to open up the panel discussion. I think there was a question earlier in the chat. Simone, if you'd like to take that.
Sure, thank you. I think there was two questions. I'll start with the one in the question and answer session from Mariette. If you guys haven't seen it, just the long and short is around the post-mining closure land use and how this tool can be used for our post-mining uses. It's a really important question, really, because if you're going to say that you're going to be sustainable from a biodiversity perspective, it doesn't help to just look to your end life of mine. You have to look at what's that economy, what's that next step after you stop mining. And we can't just say we've restored, we're done, we're gone. And this is really where we need to use this tool. And this tool is an absolutely critical part of this, because we're now able to delineate our ecosystems, their state, set targets for our restoration, and then set targets where we would like it to be maintained in those post-mining land uses. It provides us for criteria to the regulators to say, these are our relinquishment criteria, this is the percentage, this is the state in which we want to leave the environment, and this is how it should be monitored and managed so that we do not go back to a worse state than where we started. So yes, just on that question, and I'm not sure, first of all, if anyone else in the panel would maybe like to weigh in on that one.
Very briefly, I think now at least you can actually talk about biodiversity in post-mining closure. I think before it was a bit fuzzy. I think that's a big change.
Absolutely, putting real data and really what it means on the ground in terms of really complex African ecosystems and complex species dynamics as well, and looking at that in a realistic fashion, I think is incredibly important. Simone, did you want to handle the next question as well?
Sure. So I think the next one was from Lindy, asking really, how do we get companies to report? And I did note the earlier one, even the more difficult companies to report. Truth be told, I think all companies are difficult. It's the nature of business, and it doesn't really come always from companies not wanting to report. We had a wonderful discussion about that earlier. It's not knowing how, it's not knowing what the consequences of reporting. I mean, you can see it in our report, 87% negative biodiversity footprint. That's something scary to put out there. And that's what you need to recognize. So I think there's an element there beyond mandatory reporting. We can force mandatory reporting, but it becomes a tick box exercise. What we need to start doing is embedding this reporting and this decision making to say, it's okay. We know we're at this tipping point. We know we've already gone beyond. It is now the time to say, by knowing what our biodiversity footprint is, by knowing where things are going wrong, this is how we're going to be able to manage what can go right. This is how organizations, and there's so many on this call here today that I can see who would like to work together with us to actually see a better outcome. And it goes far beyond Sibanye. It goes beyond into the region, to the other mining companies, to the governments to also support this. So I think it's really a question of embedding a way of thinking into these organizations so that we all can work together, instead of it saying, oh, look at that person over there, they should be doing it all by themselves. At least that's my view.
And I have a follow-up question to that, I think, as well, is that, we haven't really discussed the implications of having a large negative footprint. It is a big number to put out there. I think it's a significant number, but also it highlights, we are talking about production landscapes, we are talking about industries, we are talking about businesses. Businesses will have a negative impact. We're not going to say that mining suddenly will have a completely positive impact on the environment, because we know that isn't the case. We need minerals, we need extraction of these minerals so that we can have a functioning society. But I think, Ismana, do you want to chat about the mitigation hierarchy perhaps a bit more, and how this footprint really would translate to that? I think these are big numbers to talk about when you look at hectares equivalent, and so it would require a lot of thought and planning and policy But do you want to just unpack that a bit more?
Certainly. And then I'll hand over to Joel. I see he's ready to answer Garth's question there as well. So look, the fact of the matter is that the mitigation hierarchy, the avoidance phase, the mitigation phase was bandied about. You kind of say, yes, this is going to be a better solution, but you didn't really know how to measure that it's a better solution. So for instance, moving your shaft a few hundred meters on, what is that measurable change that you're going to have on your natural resources? This is now where we're able to show it, and we've actually already executed it for one of our projects, which was lovely. One of our operations that's just starting up, we needed to come up with the solution for an expansion of the footprint, and by using the BDP, by showing, well, this is the hectares that you will be influencing if you take this route straight through a wetland. So let's try and innovate this, let's try and avoid this, and let's put in the mitigation, and it's really reduced our footprint significantly. Moving forward then into fast forwarding a little bit, but even into the restoration and the closure phases, a lot of people think that it's as easy as digging up where the pollutions come from and just throwing some soil back in there, and that's the best solution, because don't worry, that original source is all gone. That is not the easiest or even the best way of always doing it. And this is again where this decision-making process involved in the mitigation hierarchy, this option analysis of what's ultimately going to result in a reduced negative footprint and an increase in our positive footprint comes in. So this option analysis, this mitigation hierarchy, and then having the numbers to show your miners, you know, the engineers, the finance guys, they really understand numbers, as opposed to me preaching about wetland ecosystem services, although I still do that a lot.
Thanks so much. Joel, would you like to handle the next question?
If I may just respond briefly to a couple of points raised before, I think it's also important to highlight how the mitigation hierarchy plays out. It actually puts at the forefront the concept of ecological equivalency. We don't want gains of, let's say, wetland restoration be netted off with losses of forest or grasslands. We want the same assets to be looked at when we look at gains and losses. And that's a key principle of the mitigation hierarchy, and that's embedded in the BD protocol. But beyond that, I think just a point I just want to make beyond what was said there, I think it's also very, very important when we talk about global targets and the goal for nature recovery from 2050, for instance. That's been hottest debate right now everywhere in Europe, in Canada at least. The problem with that is we need to understand our baselines, and we need to be realistic, and we need to make very clever strategic decisions which are cost effective, because just making up numbers without any on-the-ground reality, we're just going to basically set ourselves for failure. That's one thing I want to make very clear. And I think that's why I think Sibanye is very brave to showcase the reality. But now being ambitious needs to be, it also means to be realistic. And sorry, I wanted to cover these 2 points. But now on the question from Garth, so I'll make it quick, but I could speak for 1 hour on this, Garth. The first way of how you deal with alien species is basically the condition rating methods that you use for the different ecosystem types will typically include a criteria regarding the density of aliens. So for instance, when you look at terrestrial ecosystem for Sibanye, especially grasslands, we looked at satellite imagery, and tree density covers just told us there was a problem with black wattle and eucalyptus trees and things like that. So that's just one example. And obviously we use the available reports from the mines that confirm that. Anyway, so that's one way of looking at it. But I want to introduce something controversial. We discussed actually with Brent, who I think is on the call now, just a couple of days ago. A material species is any species that actually is critical for stakeholders and needs to be managed. And because of that, you need to account for it. And what this means is that potentially alien invasive species could have an account dedicated to it as per the BD protocol. In the case of Sibanye, for the US operations where it could be done, the species accounting process, it was really focused on endangered and protected species, but that door isn't closed. Some companies might actually say, we need to have black wattle as a key critical species to manage, and that means that actually we want to actually eradicate it. That could be a goal, and you have accounts to track that. that's just to give you a little bit of additional information about how we deal with invasives. Thanks.
Thanks, Joel. I think, you know, aliens and alien plants really highlights one of those key areas where you can make a real positive measure on the ground by removing aliens and restoring ecosystems. And that doesn't necessarily have to be an expensive exercise. It can be, obviously, when you've got very dense stands of aliens. But I think it highlights that there's tools and there's levers, and knowing what you have, so measuring what you have first to know what impact you can have by managing, I think is really critical to highlight. Simon, would you like to take the next question from Paul?
Yes, with pleasure. So Paul, interestingly, we see water and biodiversity as highly interlinked. My portfolio is actually the water health and biodiversity specialist, for the reason that there's such a strong link between water and biodiversity. You're quite right. Specifically in our gold mining operations, for instance, we've got a massive water positive footprints, so we're able to discharge quite large amounts, and as you know, over time in many areas this has turned into a long-term risk. This is not to say that the same issues are not across the mining footprints, you know, in any of the industries. And this is a critical consideration in our decision-making processes as well as our assessment processes. So I just want to start first with the assessment. In terms of assessing our biodiversity footprints, Joel mentioned those wetland assessments. We've also got, for our water resources, we've got a very intricate way of how we look at water health. Everything from looking at our downstream water user requirements based on science-based limits. So we do not just stick to water use license limits. What that helps us to do is to manage our current impacts to reduce the liabilities from a long-term perspective on those downstream water users, including the environment. So we look at the aquatic ecosystem, which is typically one of the more stringent requirements. Moving forward then, we need to do complex modeling in order to understand what these ground surface water interactions will be and what our receptors around us will be. And that doesn't just look at the receptors now, we look at our receptors also into that post-mining landscape, so that we know what our treatment strategies, our closure strategies need to look like, so that we can reduce this impact on the post-mining water users. We've been fortunate in a lot of cases. Our groundwater context is fascinating, but we do also have an incredibly innovative team, and I think I saw my colleague on here, Quentin Bolser, who's working on amazing treatment technologies, because we do not want to be in the situation where we commit to a treatment technology that creates a highly saline brine, another waste product that creates yet another impact on nature and a longer term risk on the downstream communities, but rather want to look at treatment solutions that it can actually ensure sustainability and feed back into South Africa's current water crisis that unfortunately we're not going to escape unless we work in an integrated manner. Same as our nature positive approaches. It can only work if we all work together. So I hope that answered your question, but always happy for us to take this conversation much further in future.
Thank you so much. And yes, it's one of those areas where there is a lot of science to back up these accounts. There's a lot of interest in pushing that science forward, but we also need to really start pushing what we do with that science. Joel, please. Just
a very simple comment to highlight that commitment from Sibanye. When we look at the impact inventory, the driving principle behind is that you need to link connectivity with the state of biodiversity. And it actually meant in a few places, in a few of those mines, to look beyond the legal footprint, ownership, or lease of the mine. Actually, water emissions have downstream water impact that can actually be seen and be directly linked to the mine. And that was included in the biodiversity footprint. Just wanted to highlight that as well.
And I see Paul has a request to someone to please run for Parliament. So hopefully we'll put that in the next target setting. And yeah, thank you for that. And I think I think it's one of the important things to highlight is that this goes beyond mining. I think this really kind of speaks to what is possible, but showing it from a mining perspective as a bold choice. And I think this also speaks to the question we had about potentially positively impacting the share price. Wouldn't that be great if we could demonstrate that this really does make a difference to investment? We started the conversation off with talking about responsible investment and why we need to have this, and there's pressure from different stakeholder groups. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great if share price was positively affected by really showcasing nature positive directions and really mainstreaming biodiversity? I think it'd be very hard to separate that out from everything else which goes on to determine share price. But I hope you've all invested today.
And I think maybe just to add there, you know, there's a lot of disclosure going on about ESG, and there always has been. We really want to move past the point of disclosures being seen as greenwashing, insufficient, changing over time. Hopefully this will be one of the first steps to show investors that it can be done. And Adrian, if this doesn't work to get investors to invest and happy with what we're disclosing, when we start showing the measurable change and the improvement over time, I'm sure that will. So I think that's also a key note there. If I may, Gabby, just a question there from Mariette for the Far West Rand Dolomitic Water Association. So those are one of the operations, those more complex areas that I referenced earlier. It's a much broader stakeholder group than just Sibanye Stillwater involved in it. So certainly we will be looking at that in future, but it was not included in this current one. Although some of those that Joel mentioned, some of the downstream impacts from a water quality perspective were certainly considered on Far West Rand land. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I think there's some great chat about different industries which could take this on. And I think if we thought mining might be controversial in terms of this, agriculture certainly might be the next step, and wouldn't that be exciting? But yeah, I think maybe let's stick to small steps for now. I think this is a massive. I say small steps. This is a massive leap forward, and it is great to see what can be done in terms of collaboration between conservation organizations and companies, and hopefully this filters out. I think the comment on share price highlights how we need to communicate these results. We need to communicate when we do good. We need to chat about how investors should be taking this seriously. And I think the idea here is really to look at the potentials behind this as the first step. So I love that comment. So thank you very much.
May I just make a comment, please? I think it's also important to make the point that this entire process was made through the National Biodiversity and Business Network, and that the goal is to contribute to a broader society, not only South Africa, but the world. The protocol is a global solution. And that means that any stakeholder can actually use this. Any of the tools that we're producing can be applied in different contexts, different companies. And I see there's a lot of consultants today. I hope that can be useful in your context. And I really encourage you to push from your perspective as well. Because the more companies are doing it this way, again, it's going to bring better and more trust on baselines, data quality, and target setting. That's really, I think, the goal from our perspective. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Joel. I'm excited. I think I haven't highlighted how much this has made progress in the world of corporates coming together. Joel, there's a question from Paul around other countries, seeing as you were talking about global things. Would you like to?
Yes, so it's not only. Yeah, it's not only South Africa. Just for your information, we've got colleagues in Spain applying this to at least 3 companies right now. global Spanish companies. I've been doing work in Australia with actually a city council, not a company. So it's also applicable to any municipality. I know we had discussions with a major municipality in South Africa, fully there today. Anyway, the point is, yes, there are things happening all over. There were case studies in Denmark, and the point is, for us, it's only through partnership that we're going to grow this, and that's why we're trying to push to make new contacts everywhere, and to have other consultants, other NGOs actually try to apply this. And I think it's important to mention maybe that for the US work, there was support from local consultants, and I'm so sorry, I forgot the name now. Maybe Simon, you can remind me, the guys.
Oh, sorry, Casey Harvey.
Exactly. Thanks, Simon. Yeah, they were very instrumental to put together the accounts there. So thanks to them.
Great. I see there's a question from Garth around the border mining sector. And I'll take a stab at this first and then actually hear from Simone from your perspective. But, you know, we established and had a launch today, this morning, in fact, of the NBBN's Mining and Biodiversity Working Group. And really, the aims of the working group are to see considerable change on the ground in terms of the mining sector and showing leadership. I think one of the benefits for using this tool between different companies within a geographic region is we can consolidate footprints and really have a look at how to measure management change on the ground between different operations and different companies. Absolutely, we'd love to take this long and deep. I think it's something that we've really envisioned for a long time around how applicable this is to any business. It was designed to be applicable to any business, large and small. But from the mining perspective, Simon, would you like to chat about maybe the mining working group and where you see that going as well?
Oh, definitely. So, Gabby, I think you highlighted it very nicely. There's already quite, shall I call them big fish who are buying into this, and that's always great. It's usually where these types of changes start happening, and ultimately we hope to catalyze on these on the working group and the members there to invite and use this as the basis to get involved with the smaller mining groups around us, because this needs to be regionally based. I also just want to give a little bit of a context from an international perspective. In a lot of our international meetings, the International Council of Mining and Metals, the Align Group, we're looking for metrics, the industry as a whole. We're looking for ways in which to better disclose, better track, better manage. And the BDP is the first out of the gates, and I can't emphasize it just worked so well for us. So I really do believe that it's going to become embedded more into the mining industry, not just in South Africa, but it really does have a global presence that it can go into. Biggest challenge, I believe, is just there's so many people racing for metrics and all of that. So how it's been developed, I think it can just fit into so many of these disclosure metrics, and making sure that we stay on top of those discussions, being part of those groups. And if the BDP needs to grow, if we need to grow in the way we do assessments, then we grow with what's coming from the industry side. Brilliant.
I think that's a pretty good way to wrap up the meeting, although I see there's one sneaky last question. Simon, would you like to handle that?
It's very mining specific. I think we'll definitely need to unpack that. I think maybe we need to show the DMRE this tool. That's probably the next phase of this, not just our EMPRs, but what our BDP looks like. So let's see, perhaps the National Mine Closure Strategy will be happy to look at this as a way in which we can measure and commit to certain relinquishment criteria, because that's definitely where we're going with this. Thank you.